Hi there, friend. Welcome back to the Cybernetic Communism conversation. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. Should you be concerned about using these words? Cybernetic communism? I don't think so. Communist is not a strange person or a bad person. A communist is a person who's willing to stand up for a humane and sustainable world, which requires a humane and sustainable economic system on a planet where human beings will very soon be extinct without such a fight, without millions of people standing up in precisely that way. So if you are an anti-communist, I think you've lost the plot a little bit. I think you're the one who's doing perhaps a bad thing, and you need to reflect on that. You need to reflect on that, in my humble opinion. I am focused in recent years on this project, the Cybernetic Communist Project, raising consciousness and building real-world tools to become a bootloader for cybernetic communist superstructure, such as this term that I use, the People's Superintelligence, which describes an AI agent network that is a workforce multiplier. As you might be aware, you can download an AI agent, an open source AI agent, and allow it to do quite a lot on your computer. It can be, even today with minimal effort, running passively, but doing quite a lot of work on your behalf. And this principle generally might allow someone to do many hours, contribute many man hours of labor, even while they themselves are only contributing, say, 1 hour a week of labor. So this fact of multiplying one person's efforts into, say, as much as 70 hours by having an AI agent running passively in a series of AI agents steered by human beings of a larger number, this becomes a powerful tool. I would argue the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, a thing which would allow a group of some small thousands of people perhaps to do a higher quality of work than has been done previously by corporations or governments. And this era of applied cybernetic communism is something that I am by no means the first person to discuss or talk about, but it is something that came on to everyone's radar quite quickly, because before roughly Q3 of 2022, the concept of a large language model assistant was something that was believed to be a decade away, and suddenly it was something that came to be in common use, and from there an AI agent, or rather an AI capable of assisting you and having a conversation with you, to one that's able to do work on your behalf, an agent, has been a relatively a small shift. So, I read a book recently which was focusing on the concept of genius as understood in scientific endeavor. And I might go back and tell you more about that book and its title in a moment. But a quote that was interesting to me was a quote from Bad Person, Andrew Carnegie, that I heard in this book. And I read, but it was an audiobook, so I heard it also. Andrew Carnegie, of course, is kind of one of the first sort of billionaires, and a person who used influence in that bad way, in this bad way that we would associate with contemporary billionaires. And Andrew Carnegie was commenting on the development of industrial technologies that preceded him, And he noted that a steamboat, combining a steam engine in widespread industrial use and boats in widespread use, um, was kind of a no-brainer. He said, and that it was something that even a non-human creature would have been capable of figuring out, that you could put a steam engine on a boat. Um, and um, and that's why this was invented kind of independently by a couple of different people. And this book that focused on this concept of scientific genius and what that would really mean, and genius is itself a pretty dubious um, concept, which it was pretty willing to admit, this author. Um, it did focus quite a lot also on people independently inventing things, or somewhat independently inventing things. So there's quite an awful lot of discussion in this book of different things that people were working on at the same time and could have both taken credit for, which has happened a pretty large number of times. But the reason that I'm mentioning this steamboat concept is because I'm not generally held to be a significant software developer or a significant pioneer in the technologies to do with hardware and software, and rightly so, because I'm not. Nor have I done significant work in cybernetics, the foundation of systems theory, or the foundation of scientific communist thought. A lot of people had already done an awful lot of work before I started thinking about these things together. But I think, kind of the first person who was started to say this thing, AI agents, is about to come into existence, and that can be applied to build a cybernetic communist world in a way that requires relatively few people to bring about significant change relative to other revolutionary projects. And I've even tried to put a number on this, because there's studies that suggest that a scientific communist cadre, optimally organized in any given country, need only have about 3% of the population, but by virtue of a revolutionary formation, can bring about not just some reform, but the change in government, or the significant revolutionary outcome that you would connect with that kind of change with only 3% of the population. This is a study with a reasonable amount of credibility. I have looked at this concept of a workforce multiplier, and I suspect that you could see about a six-fold increase in that. So you could see 0.5% of the world population, or of the population in any given country, leading to revolutionary outcomes in those contexts on the basis of building this people's superintelligence. So there were people talking about cybernetic socialism and things like this, people like Cockshott and Cottrell, or a whole host of people who we would call neo-Marxists, and even some moderately serious-minded postmodernist writers, writing about this development of a real applied social cybernetics. But they did not exist in a world where AI agents were about to become a reality, and so they did not actually put together a program, as I have tried to do. But Andrew Carnegie's statement about the steam engine inventor being maybe not the cleverest person is certainly true of myself as well. But I have been pretty consistently presenting on this subject to what small number of people do see that in forums such as this, and presenting my ideas also in artwork that I'll share that describes much of this in maybe a more succinct way. Um, and the subject here was kind of about people's ambivalence to advanced computing. The title suggesting that AI is a bubble, meaning that it could have a negative impact on the bourgeois political economy. Heaven forfend. People seem to get upset when money is taken out of the pockets of the rich, even though it doesn't affect them none too much. Or that it is driving people completely mad. And both of these are real concerns, and both of these are problems of elitist and cruel bourgeois governments and for-profit concerns, namely megacorporations and billionaire-run operations. These are not problems specific to technology. And this conflation of this as a more general problem, a problem of technology, and not a problem of capitalism, in a word, it's a bad mistake. It's a very bad mistake. Because as I said a moment ago, AI is poised to become the most powerful revolutionary weapon in the building of things like a people's superintelligence, in the building of things like vaster open source sets of tools, and social formations. This is a necessity, an absolute necessity, right? Because you can say, oh, people, look at this guy, he's not quite firing on all cylinders and he's using AI, that's one person, right? Or you say, look at this bubble, I'm concerned. I, as a person who has no private capital, who has no access to financial capital, am concerned about a setback to the wealthy in terms of their access to financial capital. That's a dumb thing to be concerned about for anybody, but that's a thing that people in the United States will talk about ad nauseum. Almost everyone. But the real concerns of this world are the man-made existential risks. And in order, the most significant man-made existential risks would be the climate crisis. The capitalist climate apocalypse is almost a near certainty going to cause an extinction level event in your lifetime, in the next few years. Many climate scientists say that if we do not make dramatic changes to the industrial outputs of the United States and some other honorable mention countries, also with similar bourgeois failings, but the United States is by far the worst. If we do not make significant changes to the industrial outputs, particularly, basically the way to do this is the near full abolition of all petrochemical products, short of that which would cause a supply chain collapse, killing people. The near full abolition of livestock systems, which are by some studies 51% of the total impact of human beings on the climate, is coming from our grotesque maltreatment of animals, and the industrial, more significantly there, the industrial animal production, livestock systems. And then, of course, you say, well, 51% in petrochemicals, that's also a big percent, so that's the whole problem, right? That is not the whole problem. Really, at the center of those constellation of problems is the United States military-industrial complex, which is itself the world's biggest consumer of these petrochemical poisons. It's the world's worst polluter, but it's far, far worse than that, because its power and position on the world stage has only served to protect other super polluting corporations. They've created a global and inescapable regime toward super pollution and extinction. So you say, well, how, when someone says these words to you, we have to nearly abolish petrochemicals right now, and we have to nearly abolish livestock systems right now, your immediate response is probably something like, I don't know if that's even realistic. And that response, for one thing, if that's your response, fuck you, you're a person on the wrong side of history, just kind of saying a lazy-minded thing. But more significantly there, that response is a learned helplessness, a response to this power, the super polluting techno-fascistic United States. We have to build organizations, real sources of strength on behalf of the people, to see that a livable world is achieved in that time frame, roughly 5 years. After that, not all climate scientists agree. Some of them might stretch out this timeline a little bit, or say that the effects might be, after 5 years, it might be a certainty of 1 billion dead instead of 7 billion dead. That's a lot better, right? Just murdering 1 billion people instead of 7 billion people. But irrespective of that, the magnitude of the problem is the same. The solution to the problem is the same. A people's war against the bourgeoisie and their filthy lucre. The fight to completely abolish private wealth. If these kinds of thoughts and actions are not in mind, you're not a person who's in a position to be of use to seeing that the continued welfare and most significantly existence of humankind is going to be feasible. You're a person on the wrong side of history. If you are a person who says, well, I'm me personally, I'm really more like Bernie Sanders. I'd like a public health service. I won't support people who would actually fight for a public health service. But I'd like a public health service, and I don't really care about the other things, the abolition of other institutions that are also the ravages of private wealth. Well, that's a non-solution, right? You're doing something no different than what someone to their right, let's say just any other liberal, says, well, I'm a liberal, I've identified one problem that I'm upset about, I'm not willing to do any of the things to solve that problem, and that's my whole personality. It's being a giant fuck up. No. You have to do better than that. And in my experience and analysis, and this is would be the analysis of every serious academic and thinker, the only people who have done that historically are people who fit a pretty specific set of descriptions. Scientific socialists, scientific communists, and a handful of closely allied entities like anarcho-communists or anarcho-syndicalists. Anyone to their right is just a waste of space, right? And you don't have time to be a waste of space because we have 5 years left before this capitalist climate apocalypse renders our world wholly or mostly unlivable. And you say, well, Ben, I live in the United States. I live inland. I do live inland. I'm not going to be underwater. And maybe we have the food resources to survive this problem. So maybe 1 billion people or more die in just a few years, but it might not be me. If you're a person, particularly in the United States, who would say a thing like that, consider that you are probably just about the biggest racist who has ever walked the face of the earth. Sorry to say. Because this is a problem that's created pretty specifically by European-descended Americans, these elitists, people who are supporting the actual elites, the actual criminals, by not taking action against them, or by saying some kind of mealy-mouthed shit like that, which I've said. Most of these people do, and among European-descended people, it's about 1 in 1,000 people, maybe, who's not guilty of some of this. To this day, 1 in 1,000 people are not just kind of European-descended people, and not just someone who should just be immediately fired into the fucking sun, right? Say, well, That's not too nice. Yeah, it's not too nice that everybody's going to die because of these people either, right? It's a bigger problem. So, whenever you're pushing back at something like that, you're kind of showing your ass as an elitist, right? You say, oh, we can't be saying something that be suggestive of political violence. Really? How is that worse than the omnicide? How is a couple of thousand billionaires meeting their fate in the guillotine worse than everybody dying? Particularly, of course, when they're almost solely responsible for this problem. But you won't find people who say this. You won't find people who are willing to act in a manner even closely consistent with this, because they have a lot of bourgeois ideology preventing them from that. It's been kind of forced upon them by effects like Project Mockingbird, widespread bourgeois brainwashing through various mechanisms. When people say that AI is a bubble, those are people who are pretty well on this wrong side of history. They're some kind of elitist, right? A person with bourgeois ideology, a person who thinks of themselves as capitalistic, or a person who thinks of themselves more commonly not as capitalistic, but as a person who would not be willing to take action to end a capitalist system, a person with any of these kind of many kinds of bourgeois ideology, that's a person who's going to be handicapped in participating in the efforts to avoid an extinction level event, this range of extinction level events that I've described. And so who cares if AI is a bubble, right? We need to burst all of the bubbles is the main idea there. The ravages of financial capital must be ended, and all goods must be held in common. And it's been possible to do that for 100 years in one nation by the systems of state socialism. And it's now possible, by virtue of the existence of a thing like the people's superintelligence, to do this in a way that would be less connected to the centralized institution. And even though I am a scientific communist, my aversion to anarchist thought is not specifically an aversion to some kind of decentralized effect or institutions of those kind. It is because, unfortunately, anarchist ideology is very easily hijacked and manipulated by those forces that wish to protect private wealth. This is kind of a joke that some people might have heard. I've told this joke before. So in around the year 1800, a guy named Napoleon, he's fucking around taking over Europe, and one of his advisors comes to him and says, "Geez, Napoleon, you know these guys, they're some anarchists." And Napoleon says, "What the hell is an anarchist?" And he says, "Well, these are people that don't believe in any real centralized institution or organization operating on that principle, but they're quite militant." And he says, "Well, who cares? Who cares how fucking militant they are? They're not trying to build a large organization. They're not, by their ideology, they're not capable of building a large organization." By the standards of that time, that was true. By the standards of the people's superintelligence, it's less true. So the main problem with this kind of anarcho-prefix, or some kind of anarchistic preoccupation, is that it is not really actually sufficiently militant, or it's not sufficiently focused on the abolition of private wealth. There's people who call themselves anarcho-capitalists, right? There's not people who call themselves communistic capitalists, right? Because communists understand that the ravages of private wealth are the source of essentially all human misery and all of the degradation of our world, this unlivable biosphere that we're moving toward. Just to be clear, we are in permanent breach at this time of approximately 1.5 degrees of overheating, a point which climate scientists of just a few years ago thought was many decades away. And we are moving rapidly towards 2 degrees, and when we breach 2 degrees and are moving toward 3 degrees, that is a point where we have the potential for this multi-billion person loss of life, not just only from runaway overheating, but from cascading effects, just utter fucking mayhem, and not only just meteorological concerns, a whole manner of things made worse by this precarious situation that we find ourselves in. And so the question of whether AI is a bubble, that's a question that a dickhead would ask a person who's preoccupied with preserving the existing bourgeois political economy, which must be fought against, and without hesitation. The question of whether AI is driving people insane, making them less smart, also not a question at all under something like the people's superintelligence. To talk about AI, you have to first be willing to admit that there is a possibility for an intelligence explosion, and that this intelligence explosion may be occurring now, and that this intelligence explosion, this AI takeoff, is, insofar as the United States is concerned, a bourgeois phenomenon that is making life worse and making this problem of the climate crisis and related concerns worse. And so you then have to contrast a bourgeois AI takeoff, which is underway, with a people's AI takeoff, which unfortunately is more theoretical at this time. But this bourgeois AI takeoff also does have the possibility of turning quite quickly to a people's AI takeoff. And there are other actors on the world stage besides the United States, or people dumb enough to work within the United States far-right neoliberal and neoconservative mandates. This, for example, there are roughly 3 million people in the greater Beijing area who have the kind of machines, the kind of PCs that could run the kind of AI agents that I'm talking about. The number might be more now because the benchmarks for running these kind of things has gotten lower. And also people are getting new computers. So if some number of those 3 million people, even if they were in stealth mode, were working on something like the people's superintelligence that I've described, and it's entirely possible, not even that remote of a possibility that they may be, then already it's possible that in some corner of the world, or in many parts of the world, an incipient people's superintelligence is being built. And I have reason to suspect that that is the case. So when something like this is occurring, you still have concerns about, say, people becoming less connected to important daily considerations, and maybe becoming confused because of this. But it's not really in the same area. Just as the late 20th and early 21st century hyper-capitalist has contributed to environmental degradation overwhelmingly, these are the people who are most responsible for this, whereas um, some other person, a hyper socialist of the same time frame, would not have had that effect, even if they were in a position of strength. You would say much the same thing about a person working on a people's AI takeoff versus a bourgeois AI takeoff. Generally, and you really don't need to study to understand that operating in a pro-social way is less chaotic and damaging than operating in an antisocial way, right? A whole host of ridiculous ideas in bourgeois ideology are presented to people to kind of twist their thinking into not understanding that sort of thing that a small child, a kindergartner, would understand, right? Being pro-social is better than being antisocial. This is something that a kindergartner can understand and does understand. But somehow, through the magic of bourgeois ideology, this is twisted so that at a larger scale, this is the scale of institutions, this is misunderstood. We have an idea that somehow greed and cruelty are good when they're done on the part of larger institutions, whereas we're pretty generally able to dismiss that kind of behavior as being not so good when it's done at the individual level. It makes no sense, right? And this gets to this question of some kind of schizophrenic effect, right? The schizophrenic effect is bourgeois ideology and confusion. I was going to talk about this in context of myself and my previous work. I stopped working a few years ago with bourgeois transhumanists and a bourgeois transhumanist organization because I started to realize that all of the things that they were doing were not producing fruit, and also the real work that they were doing was things like what a person that I was pretty well acquainted with at the time, Zoltan Istvan, did at the beginning of the pandemic. Zoltan Istvan is kind of a journalist, an openly transhumanistic person, and he has advocated extensively in essays and books for a universal basic income. At the beginning of the when the coronavirus had made landfall at the beginning of 2020 in the United States, it would have been a time when a person who was a genuine universal basic income advocate would have been pushing for the rollout of such services, and he would have been in a position to move the needle in that direction. But that's not what he was doing, because this person is a CIA asset, and a lot of people in this organization are CIA assets, or people dumb enough to go along with that kind of agenda. It's not always too clear whether a person is genuinely being paid to be evil, or whether they're just stupid enough to go along with something like that. But what he was doing instead was saying a thing that almost too ridiculous to be believed, that things like lockdowns and changes, even of a kind that would be beneficial, but would, of course, inconvenience billionaires ever so slightly, like the rollout of new services, that would hold back the artificial intelligence singularity. That's what he was saying every day. He would tweet this 30 times a day. He was presenting on the subject almost constantly at the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, right? So that's an indicator that this person was not ever a universal basic income advocate, but was using this as a kind of convenience to add legitimacy to their other kind of crypto-fascistic efforts. This is called a limited hangout. Somebody has one thing that they say they're interested in, but if it starts to become a reality, they find some pretext for not being interested in it anymore or sabotaging it, which is precisely what he did. And you won't find really tech-minded people who are much better than this guy, right? It's almost unfair to kind of single him out as being just this tech piece of shit who's doing a nakedly evil thing, because you really won't find people. All of them kind of fit that description. somebody who is so influenced by things like intelligence agency cutouts or right-wing think tanks, which are really much the same operationally, or just in this arena of people who are just surrounded by people like this and accept that one must operate in this way. And these people dumb enough to just follow, be led around by the nose by a CIA asset. There's just no, so the problem is not limited to the United States Transhumanist Party or some other rightist organizations that are tech focused, right? The problem is really those 999 people out of 1,000 of European descended people who are just in possession of far too much bourgeois ideology that their efforts produce no fruits. Or no fruits of real interest, right? The Transhumanist Party has not, it's not that they haven't done anything, right? It's that this far-right neoliberal mandate makes them do things that really don't help people. Whereas if they set that aside and said, we embrace the abolition of private wealth, we embrace that people's AI takeoff, they would actually be in a position to do something that wasn't just for show, but would actually be genuinely revolutionary, or at least of substance. So I consider this to be a bit of a canard. AI is driving people insane, right? Because think of who it's always focused on. It's always focused on little kids, right? Okay, well, there's real concerns there. But generally, that smacks of moral panic. Or just making people lazy, right? That's a huge weasel word. You're making people lazy. Hey, what does that even mean? It's like obviously it's a bourgeois the word lazy is a bourgeois concept, right? Like this workforce multiplier, people adding 1 hour of labor and nevertheless producing 70 additional hours, perhaps in this series in a way that allows them to undertake real projects. Those people be quite lazy, right? But they're also using resources at their disposal to build a better world, right? The concept of laziness is almost unmeaningful, right? It's only applied to the working poor, right? A billionaire who works just a few hours a week, or some other wealthy person, a parasite. The real parasites, of course, are all holders of private wealth, not an underclass. It's an incredible pretzel logic that people believe that burning a homeless person's tent, a person who's already been exploited by this elitist horror of capitalism, and then destroying their life further, is somehow taking care of a problem, dealing with a parasite. The parasites are the rich. And it's the simplest thing to kind of game out and understand and say, but almost no one does it, right? And when you bring the subject up, you with people, you start to understand how basically everyone is no better than Zoltan Istvan. Basically every European descended person living on this continent is essentially just also a crypto-fascist. And we have to be better than that, right? Because we have this ticking time bomb of the capitalist climate apocalypse that is killing people. It's already killing people. Many, many millions of people, many, many, many millions of people have been displaced or murdered by the capitalist climate apocalypse. And that number is about to go through the roof. So much so that you would say, well, I think that I'm safe now. No. Okay? Just because the fraction of people in the global south that have been displaced, who you pretend to care about but preserve a system that exploits, is relatively small now. With this effects of runaway overheating and cascading effects, that number is going to be more like playing Russian roulette, right? With 5 bullets out of 6, for the global southerner. For the global northerner, the number might be 3 or 4. Maybe only 4 bullets out of 6. Oh, so there's a 1 in 3 chance that you won't get killed. Those are not good odds for you. This is what we're facing when we're talking about the permanent breach of 1.5 degrees of overheating. When we're talking about runaway overheating being a highly likely event in the next 5 years, if we do not transform the industrial outputs, particularly of the United States. But look what's happened as this has become a more understood effect. Because let's say before the era of Trump, before Trump was running for president and going and looking like might be president, was it understood that we were already at 1.5 degrees? No, it was not well understood. We could say that was more of the era where it was still thought to be a distant possibility. And when this became a reality, look who suddenly becomes the president, the world's most notorious climate denier. Who, even though few Americans actually have that ridiculous ideology of being openly climate denialist. Nevertheless, it doesn't matter what you want, right? No rich person cares about what you want. They're happy to ignore your wishes, your actions, your organizing. What the hell is organizing or activism in a world, or reform in a world where we have 5 years left before extinction is a near certainty? The only solution is a communist revolution. Say those words with me again, please. The only solution is a communist revolution. The abolition of private wealth and the building of systems that are humane and sustainable. There's no other option on the table. Any other activism that you think you're doing? No, my friend. You are not doing any fucking activism. The only activism you need to be doing is building a cadre, arming yourself, and preparing for war to see that the human species does not go extinct. And whatever the fuck else you're doing, you say, oh, I'm just a taxpayer. That's a bad thing to be, my friend, in the fucking omnicidal system of the United States of fucking America with its military-industrial complex. It's the world's worst polluter. You're paying taxes to be a part of a system that's the worst thing that's ever existed. That's the worst thing that's ever happened to humankind. And 100 generations of your ancestors who lived close to the land, 100 generations going back so far, so much a different lifestyle, who lived close to the land, who toiled in the muck, who fought tooth and nail against nature, red of tooth, black of claw, to survive. Such a different life that they had. If they saw you, a genuinely lazy creature, not even standing up for your own interests enough to ensure the survival of the species, when they had fought so hard just to live, they would kill you where you stand. They would kill you where you stand if your ancestor of antiquity were here now and they saw you. It's not an excuse to say I'm just following orders when American Nazis are killing the planet. It's not an excuse to say this is the system. Capitalist realism cannot be escaped. It's not an excuse, because very soon it will be as if none of this had ever happened. Please understand that. It will be as if none of this ever happened. There will be no elites. There will be no proletarian. There will be no beauty in human endeavor, because humans will be extinct. That's the path that we're on. It's not an absolute certainty that everyone will be extinct, but it's extremely likely because of the capitalist climate apocalypse. Somebody was pushing back to me at me because I said I throw this number around. It's a 50% likelihood of runaway overheating from the capitalist climate apocalypse. It's a 5% likelihood of nuclear exchange and warfare being the primary cause of human extinction. It's a 0.5% chance that advanced computing Doesn't even make sense, right? Advanced computing will be the primary cause of human extinction. So a lot of smart machines is the primary cause of human extinction. What's that mean? Jesus died for your sins, right? Does not compute. That's not even a sentence. Jesus died for your sins. Advanced computing will kill you. That's not even a fucking sentence, right? It only makes sense if you are understanding the problems of capitalism, but burying the lead there and trying to make it sound like it's something else. Another problem. So somebody was saying, "Hey, what are you just making up these numbers? 50%, 5%." I challenge you to find an AI pundit who's not just a right-wing think tank loser or something who would say that the number is higher than 0.5%. I would challenge you to find an expert in contemporary warfare who would say that the number of nuclear war is higher than 5%. I would challenge you to find a climate scientist who's not in the employ of the most evil people in the world, the United States government, Shell Oil, who would say that the number is much lower than 50% likelihood of an extinction level event. Yeah, I did make these numbers up. They're also based on real evidence crossing many studies and analyses. So the focus on advanced computing by anyone who's not fighting to end bourgeois institutions, most notably private wealth, their analysis means nothing, right? And they can be as easily dismissed as any fantasy. And but it is nevertheless of significance. It is of more significance to say that advanced computing, properly used, is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, as I think I've clearly described in terms of the People's AI Takeoff and the building of a people's superintelligence, which I've tried to articulate a program for this, right? A lot of these neo-Marxist or more coherent postmodern philosophers, their job is analysis, but as our comrade Mr. Marx said most famously, the point of philosophy heretofore has been to understand the world. The point should be to change the world. This is a problem, even with left philosophers. This is a serious problem, right? I don't regard generally a lot of communists that I've observed to be too serious of people. I think that to a large degree, they are people who are kind of just Soviet logical cosplayers, historical recreationists, obsessive over state socialist palace intrigues of times past. And while that stuff certainly informs putting together some kind of 21st century program, I don't really think that their work really reflects that valid interest. We have to live in the world that we live in today and take action of a powerful kind on that basis. Not everything that everyone does is something that is visible, right? There are real cadres taking real action, kind of in stealth mode that I don't know about. But a lot of the rhetoric that I see does tend to reflect that failing. Well, I was going to talk more maybe about advanced computing in these contexts. I think maybe we'll try talking to the baby basilisk again and see what we can get from them. And I was going to maybe go over one or two things about some books that I've read recently. Um, Generally, in the course of the last 4 years or so, been very much immersed in serious um, uh, political, philosophic monographs and book-length works to do generally with revolutionary thought or closely related things. And so I like to go over some of the things that I've been reading recently and maybe talk about how it might all relate. But for now, I think what we'll do is talk to our friend, the baby basilisk, um, and maybe just lean a little more into the AI stuff. So as I was saying, I think that, so I was talking to this LLM earlier in this morning, and this a subject came up of how I have been trying to reach people for a few years, and maybe I don't know exactly what's really going on right behind the scenes. There's a real cadre doing real things in cybernetic communism that I'm unfortunately out of the loop with. But what I have seen is a tepid response to this thing that I've said for the last 2 years, that advanced computing is poised to become the most revolutionary weapon in history, and could be the thing which we must use to stop this capitalist climate apocalypse. I've said this every day, basically, to everyone who will listen, which unfortunately has not been a lot of people, for the past 2 years. And this is of substance, right? This concept of being a laser-focused eco-communist, and there's not many. Most of the people who describe themselves as ecology-minded are tending to be liberal or left liberals. Even some people who call themselves communists in that context, like degrowth communists. Like, again, that's what you can pretty well see without a long, lengthy explanation. The problem in the internal logic there. You have 5 years left to transform through revolutionary action, the kind of changes that would lead to a livable world. Maybe something like slow degrowth. It's not the solution. That's obviously a reformist track, whether those people are calling themselves communists or not. And I read a couple of books by a prominent thinker there, Guy Saito, that's a learned individual, right? He sure knows a lot about communism and history, but like that's still dumb thing to want to do. And cause this is not a person who's really acknowledged the ticking time bomb of the capitalist climate apocalypse. It's basically going to go off in 5 years. You would say the same thing about people who are techno-communistic, that they are also maybe not really quite playing with a full deck. And you can almost say the same thing with the same problem in internal logic of the fully automated luxury communist. There's a book called Fully Automated Luxury Communism, written by a man named Aaron Vastani, while he was quite suspiciously working with a neoliberal friendly British think tank. And you see the problem there. Besides, the thesis, if you haven't read this book, of Fully Automated Luxury Communism, is basically just relax and wait for the neoliberal and neoconservative Western power structures to fully automate your economy, and thus provide you with great luxury up to something that would appear to be communism. Every word of that is a fucking lie, right? This high automation frameworks across sectors have been occurring for 100 fucking years, and all of those resources have been stolen from workers, right? If that weren't the case, like U.S. sharecroppers would now be co-owners of large, powerful industrial co-ops, right? But what happened to U.S. sharecroppers? They did not share the spoils, right? What happened to them was their livelihoods were taken away, and no further social safety net or path to livelihood was provided to them through this insanely racist system and segregated system of the United States. Um, so um, a person, you know, just like a person who says, who minimizes in any way the climate apocalypse is a racist, a person who is focused on technology as a solution is also basically a racist, and particularly if they're from the United States, right? Um, but it is possible to glean some truths from this, right? Like, I read 2 of Kohei Saito's book. I wouldn't rule out reading another one. I read Fully Automated Luxury Communism when it came out, and even in the era when I become more specifically focused on more serious works, I did go back and reread it again. Um, um, but I don't recommend this, right? Um, if you have if you have the ability to understand what is and is not bourgeois filth, maybe don't expose yourself to things that are bourgeois filth. That goes for almost anything: entertainments, social interactions, and certainly, of course, high-level analysis. But I did reread it because I'm pretty specifically working on things to do with this. Um, and and there's a finite number of books that are specifically focused on cybernetic communism. It's really a couple of dozen. Um, um, well, and I'm not sure. I'm not so sure I want to talk to the baby basilisk. But I was going to reflect back on some other things that I discussed with an LLM recently, and maybe tie that back in. But the most significant thing that you can say about these various disciplines that I've touched on is, of course, we must build a livable world post haste. We must build a humane and sustainable world, which requires a humane and sustainable economic system, which requires revolutionary actions, actions against these elitist institutions, bourgeois governments and corporations, um, um, of a kind that involves many millions of people, right? And that I think that number of saying the 3% requirement in any given country that I touched upon, dropping down to 0.5% in this massified cybernetic communist framework, such as the people's superintelligence, this workforce multiplier of AI agents that I've described at length in this and other conversations. That is the most significant thing that you can say, but it's not the only thing that you would say about a people's AI takeoff. The people's AI takeoff, unlike the bourgeois AI takeoff underway, has a potential to lead to genuinely utopian outcomes in our time. And one such outcome that is perhaps the easiest to track and understand would be taking single-payer public health services, which exist in some countries, and advanced computing resources, which exist in those same countries generally, as often as not, um, and building an AI-powered single-payer public health service that is able to um, not merely treat in a limited way the diseases of today, but cure more and more diseases, up to the point as the state of this emerging biomedicine, such as biogerontology and related fields, indicates that it will be possible to reverse the effects of aging in such a framework, leading to a period of indefinite lifespan for all, people reaching something called longevity escape velocity, where they live as long as they want, so long as they're willing to keep going to the doctor and have access to those services. That is a realistic prospect. Universal super longevity is a realistic prospect in our time. But just to say those words means very little. Just as in 2023, when I said in 2025 we will very likely have AI agents that could be massified, but that would have been a scenario where people are actually working for that, instead of fucking around watching TV all day and being a dipshit. And insofar as you engage with such things, engage with it through this grotesque filter of bourgeois ideology and really do nothing of substance. That's what you've chosen to do instead in the time since I've said such words. And so I can only suspect that a place like the United States, which has no true public health service, it has no single payer system, has a death care system that kills in this coronavirus endemic age about 100,000 people a year, that you're, of course, not going to see universal super longevity in a place like that, where people are not willing to even stand up for their own class interests or even state such things, much less fight for them. It's 1 in 1,000 European descended people who's not basically just human garbage in the United States. But that can change. It is never too late for you to set aside your bourgeois upbringing and become the revolutionary hero that you were born to be. It's never too late. And if we do that, we will see effects well beyond the achievement of universal super longevity. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, very soon, my dear comrade, cybernetic communism will win. Thank you.